Woman saves starving kitten, but what she finds later is truly jaw-dropping. The early autumn wind swept through the bustling streets of Brookhaven, a small town with cobblestone paths and warmly lit storefronts. Among the lively chatter of townsfolk and the aroma of fresh baked bread from a nearby bakery, Clara Hayes was on her way home from the local bookstore. She held a brown paper bag under her arm, filled with novels and journals she planned to lose herself in over the weekend. Clara was a creature of habit, a school teacher by trade with a penchant for quiet evenings and a heart that always seemed to have room for one more cause. As she rounded the corner to the narrow alley near her apartment, her ears caught a faint, pitiful sound, a high-pitched meow that cut through the rustling leaves and murmuring voices. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. Her steps slowed and her chest tightened. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the dimly lit alleyway, but it seemed empty. Then she heard it again. The sound was faint, but insistent, coming from behind a stack of discarded boxes. Setting her bag on the ground, she crouched low, her heart racing with a mix of curiosity and concern. There, huddled against the cold brick wall, was the smallest kitten she had ever seen. The tiny creature's fur, a mix of gray and white, was matted with dirt, and its ribs were visible beneath its fragile frame. Its bright green eyes were wide with fear, but still sparkled with a flicker of hope as they met Clara's. "Oh, you poor thing," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She slowly extended her hand, palm up, to avoid startling the kitten. The little creature flinched, but didn't run, its desperation outweighing its fear. Clara pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and wrapped the trembling kitten gently. It didn't resist. Instead, it let out a soft, weak meow that seemed almost like a plea for help. She cradled the kitten against her chest, her decision made without a second thought. "I've got you now," she murmured. "You're safe." Back in her modest apartment, Clara set up a makeshift bed in a cardboard box lined with a soft towel. The kitten's frailty tugged at her heart as she offered it a shallow dish of water and a small saucer of milk, knowing it might be too weak to eat anything solid. The kitten drank greedily, its tiny tongue lapping up the milk with desperation. Clara smiled, a flicker of hope warming her chest. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she said softly, watching the kitten's frail body start to relax. After a warm bath, a gentle process that left both Clara and the kitten soaked but relieved, the little feline's true beauty began to shine through. Its fur was a soft, silvery gray with a splash of white on its chest and paws. It was still painfully thin, but its eyes, a striking shade of emerald green, glowed with a quiet strength. "You look like a little warrior," Clara said, drying the kitten with a towel. "I think I'll call you Ash." The kitten let out a soft purr, its small body trembling with the effort. Clara chuckled, her heart swelling with affection. For the rest of the evening, Ash remained by her side, curling up on her lap as she read by the fire. Over the next few days, Ash began to regain strength. Clara took the kitten to the local vet, Dr. Eliza Harper, who confirmed that Ash was malnourished but otherwise healthy. Dr. Harper commended Clara for her timely rescue. "You've got a special one here," she said, scratching Ash under the chin. "It's not every day you find a kitten with such a strong will to survive." As Clara and Ash settled into their new routine, Clara noticed something peculiar. Ash wasn't like other cats she'd had growing up. The kitten displayed an unusual intelligence and attentiveness, watching Clara with an intensity that was almost human. Ash seemed to understand her emotions, curling up beside her when she was tired or nudging her hand when she was lost in thought. One evening, Clara was grading papers at her desk when Ash leapt onto the windowsill, his tail flicking with purpose. He stared outside, his ears twitching. Clara glanced over, curious. "What is it, Ash?" she asked. Ash let out a sharp meow, his green eyes fixed on something in the distance. Clara stood and walked to the window, following his gaze. The street below was quiet, with only the occasional passerby, but Ash's posture was alert, his body tense, as if sensing something Clara couldn't see. "Probably just another stray," Clara said, brushing it off. But Ash remained on the windowsill long after she returned to her work, his watchful eyes never wavering. The first truly bizarre event happened a week later. Clara had just returned home from the grocery store when she noticed Ash sitting by the front door, his tail curled neatly around his paws. He looked up at her, then down at the floor, where a small, shiny object lay. Frowning, Clara knelt to pick it up. It was a silver key, old and slightly tarnished, with an intricate design etched into its handle. She turned it over in her hand, puzzled. "Where did you find this, Ash?" she asked, looking at the kitten, who blinked up at her as if proud of his discovery. Clara searched the apartment for any clues about the key's origin, but found nothing. She even asked her neighbors, but no one recognized it. It wasn't until later that evening, as she sat by the fire with Ash curled in her lap, that the thought struck her. What if the key was connected to Ash's past? She shook her head, dismissing the idea as fanciful. "You've been reading too many mystery novels, Clara," she muttered to herself. But as she stroked Ash's soft fur, her mind kept returning to the key. What secrets could it unlock? And how had a stray kitten come to possess it? The next day, Clara couldn't shake her curiosity. She decided to take the key to an antique shop in town, hoping to learn more about its origins. The shop's owner, Mr. Whitaker, was a kind man with a love for all things peculiar. As soon as Clara placed the key on the counter, Mr. Whitaker's eyes widened. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. "It's a long story," Clara said, glancing down at Ash, who was nestled in her bag, his head poking out curiously. "This key," Mr. Whitaker continued, holding it up to the light, "is very old, likely from the late 1800s. The design is unique. It could have belonged to anything, from a family heirloom to a secret chest." He paused, his brow furrowing. "I'd say it's worth investigating where it might lead." Clara left the shop with more questions than answers. As she walked home, Ash perched on her shoulder, his tail swishing contentedly. "Looks like you've started quite the adventure, Ash," she said, smiling. The kitten let out a soft purr, nuzzling her cheek. What Clara didn't realize was that the key, and Ash, would lead her to a discovery that would change her life forever. The silver key weighed heavily in Clara's pocket as she walked home, her thoughts racing. Mr. Whitaker's words had sparked a curiosity she couldn't ignore. How had the key ended up in her apartment, and why did it feel as though Ash had deliberately led her to it? She glanced down at the kitten, perched on her shoulder with an air of quiet confidence. "You've got secrets, don't you, Ash?" Clara mused, scratching behind his ears. Ash let out a soft purr, his green eyes half closed but still attentive, as though he understood every word. By the time Clara reached her apartment, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. She placed the key on her desk and sat down, staring at it. The intricate design etched into its handle resembled ivy leaves curling around a central flower. It was beautiful, delicate, and undeniably old. "I guess we start with the basics," she said aloud, pulling out her laptop. Ash leapt onto the desk, his tail flicking as he watched her type. Clara searched for information about antique keys, hoping to find something that matched the design of hers. After an hour of fruitless searching, Clara's eyes began to blur. She rubbed her temples, letting out a frustrated sigh. "This isn't getting us anywhere, Ash." The kitten tilted his head, then pawed at the key, nudging it toward her. Clara chuckled. "You're relentless," she said, picking it up and turning it over in her hands. It wasn't until she noticed the faint inscription on the stem of the key that her heart skipped a beat. "Wait a second," she murmured, squinting at the tiny worn letters. The words were faint, but with the help of a magnifying glass, she managed to make them out. Havenwood Manor. Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Havenwood Manor was a name she recognized. It was an old, abandoned estate on the outskirts of town, shrouded in mystery and local folklore. The house had been empty for decades, rumored to be haunted or cursed. It was the kind of place children dared each other to visit, but no one ever stayed for long. Clara's curiosity burned brighter. "What do you think, Ash?" she asked, looking at the kitten. "Should we check it out?" Ash's response was immediate. He leapt onto her lap, his green eyes locking onto hers as if to say, "Yes, let's go." The next morning, Clara packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, gloves, and the key, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. She bundled Ash into a soft carrier, knowing he wouldn't be thrilled about it, but unwilling to leave him behind. The drive to Havenwood Manor took about half an hour. The estate sat at the end of a winding, overgrown road lined with ancient oaks whose twisted branches seemed to reach for the sky. When Clara finally arrived, the sight before her was both awe-inspiring and eerie. The manor was massive, its once grand facade now weathered by time. Ivy crept up the stone walls, and many of the windows were shattered or boarded up. A rusted iron gate hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Clara stepped out of the car, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Ash let out a plaintive meow from his carrier, and she quickly unzipped it, allowing him to step out onto the gravel driveway. "Don't wander too far," Clara warned, but Ash stayed close, his tail swishing as he surveyed their surroundings. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Clara entered the manor's dimly lit foyer. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight, streaming through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Ash padded silently beside her, his ears swiveling at every creak and groan of the old house. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, but pressed on, clutching the key tightly in her hand. The foyer led to a grand staircase, its ornate banister carved with intricate patterns that mirrored the design on the key. Clara's breath caught as she realized the connection. "This has to be the place," she whispered. Her footsteps echoed as she climbed the stairs, Ash following closely behind. At the top of the landing, they came to a corridor lined with closed doors. Clara tried the handles, but most were locked or jammed shut. Her heart sank until she reached the final door at the end of the hall. The keyhole was large, and the design around it matched the etchings on the key exactly. Clara's pulse quickened as she inserted the key and turned it. With a loud click, the door creaked open. Inside was a small, windowless room, illuminated only by the beam of Clara's flashlight. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty books, faded photographs, and tarnished trinkets. In the center of the room stood an ornate wooden chest, its surface carved with the same ivy and flower motif as the key. Ash let out a soft chirp, circling the chest as Clara approached. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid, revealing its contents: stacks of letters tied with ribbon, a leather-bound journal, and a small, intricately carved box. Clara's fingers hovered over the items, unsure where to start. She picked up the journal, its cover embossed with the initials E.B. Flipping through its pages, she realized it belonged to Eleanor Braithwaite, a member of the family who had once owned Havenwood Manor. The entries were dated over a century ago and told the story of a young woman who had hidden away the family's most precious heirlooms during a time of financial ruin. Eleanor's words hinted at a deep love for her home and a desperate hope that her family's legacy would one day be restored. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears as she read. It felt as though Eleanor's voice was reaching out through time, sharing her story with someone who could finally bring it to light. Among the letters was one addressed simply to the finder. Clara opened it with care, her heart racing as she read the delicate handwriting. "To the one who has found this room, know that you hold the history of my family in your hands. May you protect it as I once did, and may it bring you the peace it brought me in my final days." Clara looked down at Ash, who was now sitting by her feet, his green eyes gazing up at her with quiet understanding. "Looks like you led me to something incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ash let out a soft purr, nuzzling against her leg as if to say, "We're just getting started." The next few days were a blur of research and discovery for Clara. The journal and letters she had found in Havenwood Manor painted a vivid picture of the Braithwaite family's rise and fall. She learned that the manor had been abandoned after a series of misfortunes: the death of Eleanor Braithwaite, a family scandal, and eventually financial ruin. Yet Eleanor's words suggested that her treasures might be more than sentimental. They could hold tangible value. Clara sat at her kitchen table, the journal open in front of her. Ash, the ever-curious kitten, sprawled beside it, his fluffy tail flicking against the pages. His green eyes followed Clara as she pieced together the fragments of history. Eleanor hid this legacy for a reason, Clara mused, running her fingers over the faded script. But why leave it to chance? Did she hope someone would stumble upon it, or did she know it would take this long to be uncovered? Ash let out a soft meow, his paw nudging the small carved box Clara had brought back from the manor. She hadn't opened it yet, hesitant to disturb its contents, until she understood its significance. "Well, I guess there's no better time," Clara said, reaching for the box. The lid creaked open, revealing a collection of delicate jewelry, rings, necklaces, and brooches encrusted with gemstones that glimmered even in the dim kitchen light. Clara gasped, realizing the items must be worth a fortune. Among the jewelry was a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. Clara unfolded it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map. It depicted Havenwood Manor and its surrounding grounds, marked with notations in Eleanor's handwriting. One note, scrawled near a grove of trees on the edge of the property, caught Clara's eye. The heart of the legacy lies here. Ash leapt onto Clara's lap, his curious gaze fixed on the map. "You really have a knack for finding hidden treasures, don't you?" she said, scratching behind his ears. The map solidified Clara's resolve to return to the manor. She needed to uncover whatever Eleanor had hidden in the grove. The thought of the treasures filling the empty halls of the Braithwaite estate filled Clara with determination, not for personal gain, but to honor the family story. Clara arrived at Havenwood Manor early the next morning, the map and Ash by her side. The kitten, now accustomed to adventure, rode calmly in a small carrier until they reached the edge of the grove marked on the map. As soon as Clara unzipped the carrier, Ash leapt out, sniffing the air with a sense of purpose. The grove was dense with towering oaks and tangled underbrush, the air cool and damp beneath the canopy. Clara followed the map's directions, counting her steps from a large stone that served as a landmark. Ash darted ahead, his keen senses guiding him through the foliage. "Wait up, Ash," Clara called, laughing despite her nerves. The kitten stopped abruptly, his tail erect as he stared at a patch of disturbed earth. Clara's heart raced as she approached. The ground appeared to have been dug up and refilled at some point, though nature had done its best to cover the evidence. Using the small shovel she'd brought, Clara began to dig. The earth was dense and unyielding, but she pressed on, her excitement growing with every inch she uncovered. After several minutes, her shovel struck something solid. "Here we go," Clara whispered, adrenaline surging through her veins. She unearthed a wooden box, similar in design to the one she'd found inside the manor. Its surface was weathered but intact, the ivy and flower motif still visible beneath the dirt. Clara carefully lifted the lid, revealing a collection of documents and ledgers. The documents told a story of wealth and philanthropy. The Braithwaites had been patrons of the arts, funding schools, hospitals, and cultural institutions in their community. Among the papers was a deed to Havenwood Manor and a note from Eleanor. "To the finder of this legacy, you now hold the means to restore what was lost. May this bring hope to those who need it most." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The deed and accompanying papers seemed to grant the bearer control of the property and its assets, should they choose to claim them. The Braithwaite fortune, once hidden, was now in her hands. Ash meowed, rubbing against Clara's leg as if sensing her mix of awe and uncertainty. "What do I do with this, Ash?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "This is more than I ever imagined." The kitten tilted his head, his green eyes calm and steady. Clara felt a wave of reassurance wash over her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew she couldn't let this opportunity go to waste. Eleanor's legacy deserved to be honored, and the manor could once again become a place of beauty and purpose. Over the next few days, Clara began making plans. She researched grants, restoration specialists, and ways to fund the revival of Havenwood Manor. The documents Eleanor had left behind provided guidance, and the jewelry she'd found would serve as a starting point. The news of her discovery spread quickly, drawing attention from historians, journalists, and community members. People were fascinated by the story of the Braithwaites and the mysterious woman who had uncovered their hidden treasures. Clara's phone buzzed constantly with offers of help, from volunteers eager to restore the property to local organizations wanting to partner on community initiatives. It seemed the story of Havenwood Manor was already inspiring people, just as Eleanor had hoped. Through it all, Ash remained a constant companion, his presence a reminder of the serendipity that had led Clara to this moment. She often wondered if the kitten had been sent to her for a reason, his uncanny instincts guiding her to the treasures and the history they contained. One evening, as Clara worked late into the night, she glanced over at Ash, who was curled up on the desk beside her. "You've changed everything, you know that," she said softly. Ash let out a quiet purr, his eyes closing, as if content with the role he'd played.